evening on such a hot one. I want you to know that we're less hot or cooler. We're cooler than the Dashner family. Our air conditioner downstairs has been out for the past 2 weeks. And I tell you what, you really appreciate something when it's taken away from you abruptly and then brought back. I mean, we were laying down in the floor next to the vents this afternoon, enjoying the cold air. I was trying to keep my German Shepherd from laying on top of it. Let that air out. He's been suffering. But we're so happy to have air conditioning at our house and air conditioning in here too. It's really nice and good, whereas it's really sweltering out there. Well, it's good of you to be here, and I'm glad to be up here because I like talking about this. I like this series that we're doing, Portrait of God, Viewing the Divine through His Work of Redemption. We're doing this out of the book by Frank Chesser called Portrait of God. And if you get you a book, if you haven't yet, it's a good. It's fascinating to see how he goes through and really ties everything in the Bible from Genesis, we said, chapter 3, all the way to Revelation, how it all goes back to Jesus and how God uses so many different instances and events in the Bible to bring us to redemption. And that's exactly what happens this week. We're in Exodus, beginning at Exodus 19. And I tried to figure out how to go about doing this. And one of the things that I have a vivid imagination, and it worked really well for me being a theater teacher and an English teacher and all that for many years. And so whenever I'm looking at the Bible or listening to someone's lesson or anything like that, I really try to picture it in my mind's eye what's going on and what are the people like and what are their life circumstances. And I do that now not only because it really helps me to understand it and appreciate it, but when I was going through all of my education training, if you don't know, education is all about trends. I mean, it's always what's newest and greatest and who can come up with things and whatnot. And when I was going through college, we always talked, everything was the worldview versus your personal view. And so in our education classes and trying to identify with children, we would try to say, okay, here's what culture is saying. Here's what the world is saying is going on with a certain topic or something that's going to happen or is happening. Well, how does that connect or identify you personally? How does that really, what does it mean to you? And so whenever I taught English or just about any type of book or poem or anything, that's what I would try to do, is try to say, okay, this is a very important topic. This is what the author is saying. Well, what can you get out of that? What can you learn from that? And I really learned that from a young age. My mom was a voracious reader, but she read romance novels. She would go to the book exchange store, and she would take a grocery bag full of romance novels, and she would turn them in and get another grocery bag full, and she would read 2 or 3 books a week, a lot of times. And I was always fascinated. Do you remember what it is you're reading? Yeah. She would tell me some of the stories, and I'd be like, But she was always wanting me to read, try different books and all that. So my first introduction to my most favorite book in the world was through my mom. And that book is To Kill a Mockingbird. I love this book very, very much. And I probably, if I had to put a number on it, I probably read it all the way through more than 40 times. I've probably taught it 8 to 10 times. I studied it in college. I even studied it in my master's degree program and taught about communication and things. But it's a book, a good book, because the characters are so well written. The characters are so homey. They're so down to earth. And it's so interesting as I've studied the book more and learned more about the book. I learned more about the author of that book too, and that's Harper Lee. Harper Lee was a very interesting lady. Uh, she was born way back in 1926 and lived in Monroeville, Alabama, down the road. We're all proud of that. And she was just like, her dad was a lawyer, very much like Atticus, the lead character. If you haven't read To Kill a Mockingbird, I'm just saying, you got to do it now, right now. Go out, get you a copy. Um, but she grew up in a small town, just like the small town in the book. And she had a couple of sisters, and she had a brother, and she had cousins. One of the cousins was named Truman Capote, a very, very, it's a good word, flamboyant, I guess would be the best word for Truman Capote, character. He was he was famous before her, and she kind of acted as his secretary for different things, including he wrote a book about a murder of a whole family on a farm called In Cold Blood, and he stayed with the people, the two guys that were eventually executed for the crime. He stayed with them and even saw the execution. But she was his secretary, and they were very, very close. And all the while, he's writing short stories and books. He wrote Breakfast at Tiffany's, if you didn't know, and a lot of other smaller stories and novellas and stuff. But while they were doing this, she kept going back to this story she had written. And the story that she wrote, he didn't like, and she didn't like that much either. And that was the only other book that we have by Harper Lee called Go Set a Watchman. And interestingly enough, when To Kill a Mockingbird came out in 1960, it won the Pulitzer Prize. It was picked up to be a movie. If you've seen the movie, Gregory Peck, her and Gregory Peck got to be great friends. And once she got to be famous, she picked up from Monroeville and actually moved to New York. Lived in New York for most of her life. But she made millions off of To Kill a Mockingbird. The last total I saw was that To Kill a Mockingbird had sold over 40 million copies. One of the most bestsellers ever. It's always been on the bestsellers list since 1960. And the movie won all kind of Academy Awards and all that. But she was always afraid of what's next. And everybody was always asking her what's next. What are you going to write about next? What's your next story? And she couldn't come up with one. She did write another book. Now, she wrote lots of letters and had lots of correspondence with different people. And she kind of edited some stuff and all for Capote, and they kind of worked together on some stuff. But then she got sick toward the last part of her life. She died in, I believe it was 2016. But toward the end of her life, one of her lawyers was going through her effects and found the first book, Go Set a Watchman. And Harper Lee she told everybody that she didn't like the book. She didn't like the characters as she developed them into To Kill a Mockingbird. But the lawyer said, oh, we're going to go ahead and supposedly, there's a lot of controversy, but supposedly she gave her okay for it to be published. And it's not as good. I'll be straight up with you. I don't like it because I like To Kill a Mockingbird so much. And so a lot of the things, the stories in To Kill a Mockingbird, I can relate to. I grew up in a neighborhood that had a bunch of kids in it, and we were always getting in trouble, and we were always doing stuff. And we had people, adults, who would try to steer us in the right direction and things. And we learned things, and we matured like the characters do in To Kill a Mockingbird. And so when I think of the Bible and how these stories relate to me, that's what I try to do. I try to think about what are the circumstances that these people are really going through. What's happening in their lives that causes them or perpetuates or has them do things. And so that's kind of where I go with this. And the whole name of that game is empathy. That's what you do. And Atticus in To Kill a Mockingbird's famous things, you really don't know someone until you walk around in his shoes. You really don't know someone until you put yourself in their position, until you put yourself in their lives, until you try to figure out what it's like to be them. And as a teacher, that's really important. I really try to do that with my students. And I think it's a really good thing to do when studying the Bible and looking at these different stories. These are all people. They're real people. They're people who lived and who went about, and these aren't just stories that are fiction. And so the children of Israel during this time, after getting to, you've got me self-conscious now, Sinai, she was correcting me. I was saying something wrong. I don't even know what I said wrong. Once they get to Sinai, they have to relearn their lives. And I know that sounds crazy and all, but it really is true. You think about the children of Israel, and for 400 years, they were in Egyptian captivity. And we say, it's 400 years. Yeah, moving on. But think about what 400 years really is. Generations is 400 years. We went to Europe earlier this year, and we saw things, cathedrals and things like that took over 100 years to build and were built before Columbus sailed for the New World. And things like that is an amount of time that's hard for us to appreciate. 400 years is a long, long time. So, in their moaning and groaning and being in as slaves in Egyptian bondage, God had to take them as His own and, for lack of a better word, reprogram them. If you think about it, they were living in Egypt, in Goshen, and so all of their life, all of their culture, all of their worship, everything that they eat, everything they did was Egyptian. They had very little culture. I was about to say Jewish culture, but very little culture of their own. They were Egyptian. And so when you look at the plagues, we did a series class in our Sunday morning class, and I taught about the plagues, and that was right up my alley because I taught mythology in my high school that I taught. And I went over Egyptian mythology with my students for like almost 5 or 6 weeks. And so it's really interesting if you start looking at the plagues. Each one of the plagues that God placed on Egypt were in-your-face affronts to individual Egyptian gods. And it was blatantly, so this is your God, I'm the one true God. And then he throws the plague at him. And then he comes up with the next one and the next one. And if you think about being one of the children of Israel at this time, just think about seeing that, being witnesses to that, and how this God who now says, you're going to go with me and do the things that I want you to do, and I'm going to carry you somewhere that you've never been, never heard of, never thought of going, and I'm going to start a whole new nation with you. It had to be terrifying for them for a while. And so looking at that and thinking about how they go about this and how wonderfully God goes about reprogramming them, he does a great job of this in that year at Sinai. So 2 months after leaving Egypt, just 60 days, the nation of Israel arrived at Sinai. God took a year. He took a whole year to give them the law, to set about the pattern for the tabernacle, all the stuff that was going with it, the pattern for the priesthood and all that was going with it, the spiritual system and all that was going with that, a whole new religion for them, a completely new culture for them. And then organizing them beyond that into the 12 tribes. And the way in which he did that is by working on grace and faith. Exodus 19:4-5 says, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians. Just absolutely. When we were talking about this, Isaac and I get carried away. We were talking about this on the way here. When the nation of Israel left Egypt, Egypt was done. I mean, they had no crop. There was no food. They couldn't go back to Egypt. You know, they whine and complain, oh, we should go back. There was no Egypt to go back to. There was no food. There was no storehouses. There was no, think about it. He killed all the fish and everything. It was just, there was no army. There was most of the men and the children were gone. Most of the men who had been soldiers were at the bottom of the Red Sea. So Egypt was just decimated by this. And how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Sounds really intimate, doesn't it? Now, therefore, if you will indeed, here's the important part, obey my voice and keep my commandment. If you do these things, we talked about this already, way back with Adam and Eve. If you just obey my laws, if you obey my rules, if you do what I asked you to do, you're going to be great. Everything's going to be wonderful. And that's exactly what that faith and obedience does. We'll talk about it in the morning. Obey my voice and keep my covenant. You shall be my treasured possession among all people, for all the earth is mine. So you think about that. Here it is. They saw His great power. They saw God's strength over every aspect of life. And now the most powerful being in the universe says, I want to make you mine. I want to bring you to me. I want to take care of you. That's a pretty incredible thing. So it's through grace and faith. So obedient faith is the I wrote this directly from it, is the receptacle of the spiritual blessings of love and grace. Isn't that wonderful? I love that phrase. Obedient faith is the receptacle for the spiritual blessings of love and faith. And we talked about this again a little bit earlier. Chester says God's grace is a manifestation of His love for man, and man's faith is a demonstration of his love for God. Love adheres in God, and grace is innate to love. The melody of grace resounds from the chords of divine love. Isn't that wonderful? Obedience is intrinsic to faith. It's got to be there. And faith is stimulated by love. It all goes together. Biblical faith is a faith which works by love. The songs of the obedience of faith reverberate from the strings of love. These principles are in minds, but not in the hearts of the first generation from Egypt that assembled there. So in other words, if you love me, keep my commandments. Okay? God's saying, I love you so much. I want to make you mine. How much you love me? If you love me, all you got to do is keep my commandments. Keep this law that I'm giving you. So that biblical faith obeys God. When God speaks, faith obeys. We get hung up on faith is believing in those things not seen. Well, yes and no. Yeah, that's true. But it goes so much more than that. It has to do with not just believing, but it has to do with the reasoning behind that believing. And that's that love. So faith comes from hearing, and hearing from the Word of God. Y'all with me so far? I go so fast. I tried not to, but it's one of those things I feel like I've got so much to say. And I do, and I love saying it. So God's grace is a manifestation of His love for man. So in other words, God loves us so much that He is willing to give us that grace, forgive us once we follow those, adhere to those commandments. Man's faith is a demonstration of his love for God. 1 John 4:8, anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. We need to underline that every time it's in the Bible. Obedience is intrinsic to faith, and faith is stimulated by love. Galatians 5:6, for in Christ Jesus neither circumcision nor uncircumcision counts for anything, but only faith working through love. So you have to have that love working through that faith. So, God instructed the Israelites to prepare themselves for His coming. So this whole time we've got the pillar of fire by night. We have the cloud by day. And they've seen the different actions of God, things that God does. But now God's saying, okay, I want you to see me. Because you're going to build me a house. And you're going to worship me. And so this is how you're going to do it. So He wants to first show them who He is. And again, kind of see if you can imagine what this could possibly be like to these people. In Exodus 19:10 through 15, He says, so Moses came and called the elders. No, that's too far back. Well, that's okay. Let's go down to middle of 8. Moses said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do. And Moses reported the words of the people to the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, behold, I am coming to you in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you, and may also believe you forever. Okay? So this is going beyond that fact. God is saying, okay, I want you to know that me and Moses are tight, and that everything that Moses says is coming from me. So I'm going to show you how close Moses and I are. So when Moses told the words of the people of the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments and be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. And you shall set limits for the people all around, saying, take care not to go up into the mountain or touch the edge of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death. No man shall touch him, but he shall be stoned or shot, whether beast or man. He shall not live. When the trumpet sounds a long blast, they shall come up to the mountain. So they got to put some police tape around the mountain so that they'll know not to cross over that tape, get on the mountain, because if you do, you're gone. Moses went down from the mountain to the people and consecrated the people, and they washed their garments. And he said to the people, be ready, for on the third day do not go near a woman, so they have to be pure. On the morning of the third day there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people in the camp trembled. Then Moses brought the people out to meet God. And they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly, like an earthquake. And as the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him in thunder. Can you imagine? The Lord came down on Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. And the Lord said to Moses, go down and warn the people, lest they break through to the Lord to look, and many of them will perish. Also let the priests who come near to the Lord consecrate themselves, lest the Lord break out against them. And Moses said to the Lord, the people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you yourself warned us, saying, set limits around the mountain and consecrate it. And the Lord said to him, go down and come up, bringing me Aaron. But do not let the priests and the people break through to come up to the Lord, lest he break out against them. So Moses went down to the people and told them. So this whole scene, it's like something out of a movie or something. The whole mountain covered in smoke and thunder and lightning and flashes and fire and all, just terrifying. But he wanted them to see his power. He wanted them to see that he is taking that step toward them. So in doing that, God gives them the beginning of the law. He gives them the Ten Commandments. And again, this is one of those things that we were talking about this in my family also. These are things that we talk about all the time, but we really don't talk about how important they are still and what it means to us to have these commandments, what these commandments actually mean. We'll come back to them. We'll come back and forth here. Let's see. The first four commandments testify to the nature of God. So if you look at the first four, you shall have no other gods before me. Well, he may put that in their mind real quick with Egypt, didn't he? He showed what he would do to the other gods of Egypt. And he not only did it to them, but throughout the Old Testament. If his people went and worshiped these other gods, God would make a very good lesson out of it for them. You shall not make for yourself any graven image. This is a tough one, because the Egyptians, that was part of how they worshiped. They walked around with little pendants and gold and things of the different gods, who they worshipped and what they meant to them, including Pharaoh. Pharaoh was seen as a god himself, or believed himself to be a god also, a direct descendant of Osiris. The gold and silver, jewels that they brought out of Egypt, no doubt, were some of these statues, were some of these pendants that they had. That was just part of their worship in Egypt. You should not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. There's been a lot of discussion about that. And again, when I was teaching, I don't know if it's still popular or not, but one of the things that absolutely just drove me crazy, if a kid was saying something, trying to make a point, or saying, "Oh, I bet you gotta believe me that what I'm saying is true," they would say it and then say, "On God." And they would say it every other word. I would tell the kids, don't do that. You're saying something that's very, very personal, something that's very precious, something that's, you're throwing the name of God, the creator of the universe, out there in your everyday conversations without any regard for what it actually means. And we do that so often, or we'll come up with some substitute or something else. It's one of those things, God's name is so important, so holy, that we should treat it as such. And it's hard for us to do that because, again, culture, they're so flippant. They're so flippant with things, and how we say things and how we address things is just crazy. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Remember, there were two reasons for this. One, historical. On the seventh day, God rested after created everything. And then, what was the other? Remembrance that they needed to keep holy. What else happened on the Sabbath? Y'all remember from last week? Pentecost and putting the blood on the doorway. Passover. What'd I say? Pentecost? Passover. So here he has this saying, look back, remember, reflect on what you have been given. Reflect on who I am. Remember that. And remembering is not something you just do once. It's a living, breathing thing. It's something that you continuously do. So those first four are really, really important. They're really important as our relationship to God. And then the remaining six demonstrate how faith, love, reverence, and gratitude for God manifest themselves in one's relationship to man. So Jesus said, fear God and keep His commandments. And the second, likened unto it, was love thy neighbor as yourself. Right? So look at these last six. You have honor your father and mother. And that's another thing. You work with kids. Oh, hear them talking to their parents sometimes. You just want to, I don't know. But honor your father and mother. They brought you into the world, they can take you out. I love that saying. You shall not kill. Life is special. It doesn't say, it doesn't speak, you shouldn't kill people that you know, or you should kill. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, and you shall not covet. Again, all of these things, respecting one another, acceptance of the sovereign God is revealed. the first 4 commandments impels one to respect parents, life, marriage, property, truth, and one's neighbor's wife and possessions. That pretty much takes care of everything, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Stoning. Yeah. Yeah. That's true. That's absolutely true. Yeah, back in the day, if you disobeyed your parents, they took you out back and stoned you. That's harsh, but I taught them pretty quick. That's the thing. Back in the good old days, Well, I won't go there. Huh? Oh yeah, right. That's the thing. I would have never thought of disrespecting or saying anything to my parents or anything. It was just my parents. They wouldn't have put up with it for one thing. And I would have known real quick that they wouldn't put up with it. I got in trouble a lot. I was mean. Anyway, so it has these, and then if you look at the text, there it goes. Exodus 23, 21 through 23 constitutes the practical ramifications of these 10 commandments. These precepts encompass every aspect of life. And it's hard. It's hard if you look, chapter 21, it's laws about slaves, how you care for slaves. And this is the laws that they were, laws about restitution. You owed somebody, if someone did you wrong, if you dug a hole and an ox fell in it or whatever, how you were to fix that. Laws about social justice. Things, this is where don't permit sorcery. That's important. Don't mess with that. Or any other things, the personal the laws that God puts here that you wouldn't think would need to be a law, but He puts it there anyway, probably because some people broke it, and you're like, ugh. So you have those against social justice, and it's hard to read. It's hard, and you have to think about, how is this relevant to me? Well, a lot of them are. We just almost take them for granted because they've kind of been ingrained in our society. Laws about the Sabbath and the festivals. So all of these different things, He kind of takes the main laws, and it's very akin to what we have in our form of government, is you take the big laws, and there's a bunch of little laws underneath it that break it all down. In Exodus 24, we have that confirmation of that covenant. And that's really important. If you look at chapter 24, and he said to Moses, "Come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and worship from afar. Moses alone shall come near to the Lord, but the others shall come near, and the people shall not come up with him." Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the rules. And the people answered with one voice and said, "All the words that the Lord has spoken, we will do." And that's it. It's really easy to say that. You have a bunch of rules. And again, back to my teaching, every first day of school, I'd always go over my rules. And I'd go over the consequences of everything. And I'd have them sign a piece of paper saying that they read the rules. And then, toward the end of my teaching career, I was sending the rules home to the parents and having the parents sign the rules to make sure that they understood the rules. That's what we do. We're quick to say, "Oh, yeah, we'll follow those. We've got that. No problem." And Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. He rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the people of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. And Moses took half of the blood and put it in the basins, and half of the blood, notice the same word here coming up, blood, 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 he threw against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. And Moses took the blood and threw it on the people. Just a little flinging it. And said, behold, it's not like Carrie dumping pig blood. Behold, the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you is in accordance with all these words. Then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel went up, and they saw God of Israel. All the thunder and lightning and smoke and all. There was under his feet, as it were, a pavement of stone, like the very heaven for clearness. Isn't that something? And he did not lay his hand on the chief men of the people of Israel. They beheld God, and they ate and drank. So they go up on the mountain and have a party with God. And they sealed the deal, as it were. Then the Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain, and wait there, that I may give you tablets of stone with the law and the commandment, which I have written for their instruction. So Moses rose with his assistant Joshua, we know him, and Moses went over the mountain of God. And he said to the elders, wait here for us until we return to you. And behold, Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a dispute, let them go to them. Then Moses went up to the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain, and the glory of the Lord dwelt on Mount Sinai. And the cloud covered it 6 days. And on the 7th day he called Moses out of the midst of the cloud. Now the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on the top of the mountain in the sight of the people of Israel. Moses entered the cloud and went up to the mountain. And Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. Isn't that something? So they've got the law written by Moses. They've got the book. He reads them the book. They agree to it. It's read, received, ratified with blood. Now, this blood of the animals was sacred. It was the seal of the Old Testament. The nation of Israel, the laws given through Moses, the tabernacle, its furniture, were validated by this animal blood. And we know about this blood because we know that in the New Testament, and this all leads to Jesus, that New Testament, the new covenant that we have is with Jesus. And that covenant is sealed with Jesus' blood. Just like this covenant here with Moses and the children of Israel is also sealed with blood. So it goes hand in hand. Let's see, in the words of Hebrews 9:14, how much more has the new covenant been ratified and sanctified by the blood of Christ? The blood of Christ is the blood of the covenant, Hebrews 10:29. Jesus referred to his blood as the blood of the New Testament, Matthew 26:28. Every letter and every word and every verse and every chapter and every book of the New Testament has been validated by the blood of the perfect Lamb of God. There is no blood on any other word, action, religious practice external to the law of Christ. If those that despise Moses' law died without mercy under two witnesses, Hebrews 10:28, how much greater must be the punishment that awaits those who despise the law of Christ by offering strange teachings or practices void of the New Testament. People coming up with stuff themselves. So that's the connection. We said we are always going through redemption. Now in chapters 25 through 31, again, it's really interesting. It's hard to read. But if you have the time and you can break it up into small bite-sized pieces, it's really interesting to read how specific God is. To the inch. He knows exactly what He wants, how He wants it to look, how it's to be set up. So He tells contributions for the sanctuary, what the Ark of the Covenant was to look like, what the table of bread was to look like, the golden lampstand, the tabernacle itself, the bronze altar, the court of the tabernacle, the oil for the lamp, the priest's garments, the consecration of the priest, the altar of incense, all these things. The anointing oil, the bronze basin, the census tax, how they would pay for everything. It's all laid out right there. Super specific. And then something else, I always found this interesting. At the beginning of chapter 31 is how wonderful God is. The Lord said to Moses, See, I have called by name Bezalel. Bezalel? Let's say that. Bezalel, the son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. And I have, get this, filled him with the Spirit of God, and gave with ability and intelligence, with knowledge and all craftsmanship, to devise artistic designs, to work in gold, silver, and bronze, and cutting stones for setting, and in carving wood, to work in every craft. And behold, I have appointed with him Oholiab, the son of Sychemash, of the tribe of Dan, and have given to all able men the ability that they may make all that I have commanded you: the tent of meeting, the ark of the testimony, the mercy seat, the actual place where God would sit on the ark of the covenant. It says, and all the furnishings in the tent, the table, its utensils, its pure lampstands, with all the utensils, and the altar of incense, and the altar of burnt offerings, with its utensils, and the basin and its stands, and the finely worked garments, the holy garments of Aaron the priest, garments of his sons, for their service of priests, and the anointing oil and the fragrance incense for the holy place. According to all that I have commanded you, they shall do. So God filled these men and their brains and their hands with this unbelievable skill and talent and artistry to be able to make these things the way He wanted it, to fulfill this law. Isn't that wonderful? And you think about, oh, it's such a mystery how these things were made and how they would do this and all that, and the intricacies of it and what they did. God gave them that ability. It's just a wonderful thing. And I always somehow skip over that part. I don't know why. So He created all those things. Moses goes back up, and then we have the slip. Now, again, putting yourself in we're almost, the children of Israel. They took the gold and all that. They really did believe. Think about it. They heard all this lightning and thunder and all these things and the smoke. They probably thought Moses was dead. They had no idea where he had gone. And so they knew themselves that they could not speak to God themselves. They just didn't have it in them to do that. They needed Moses. So Aaron, of course, is right there. Aaron should have known better. But Aaron kind of assists them in the making of the golden calf. Did you know that this golden calf is also symbolic of one of the Egyptian gods? His name was Apis. Sometimes it's spelled Hapis. And he was literally an intermediary between man and the upper gods. There was a hierarchy to the Egyptian gods. And so in order to be able to get to Ptah or Osiris or Atum, you had to go through a piece in order to do that. So it wasn't, they did fall down, they worshiped and all that, but this, again, this is that idea of this is all they knew. This is how they had lived their lives for 400 years. And so in that absence, of course, they knew. They had made the covenant. They shouldn't have done it. They should have known that this was a graven image also. But it's that hard. We get in these habits. We get ingrained in this way of doing things. And we set our minds on those things instead of setting our minds on what we really should. And that's the actual Word. And I think that's the lesson. And we are right there at 7:52. And I didn't let y'all talk a bit. I'm sorry. That's all I got for you this evening. Any questions or comments or anything? Thank you. I get carried away. I don't know. I don't even know that. I don't know how much of the old law the Jewish people still follow or any of that. So much of it, I know I don't know. Yeah, not that much. Not the sacrificing and all that, I know that.
The Pharisees of Jesus' day still
Mm-hmm.
prominent influence on modern Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
But that's specifically the Orthodox Jews.
Right.
Those little hats on.
Right.
That is directly. Sadducees, that the sect of the Sadducees, they're completely gone. There's nobody that believes that stuff anymore. But the majority of the Jewish race are atheists. The largest percentage of them consider themselves atheists.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
You go on farmland in Ashland, the largest percentage of Jewish people in the world at this point will be considered atheists.
That's something else. Well, that's all I've got for y'all. Thank you so much for coming. Think on these things. Go back and read it.